Good morning and welcome back to the Fulfilled Symposium. My name is Ashley Bigham and I'm an assistant professor at the Knowlton School of Architecture. I first want to start with a few thank yous. First to the Knowlton School of Architecture, especially to Todd Gannon for the support and funding to create this event, which came through the Knowlton Fund and the Livesey Professorship. So I'd like to thank those organizations. In addition to the Knowlton School, support was provided for Fulfilled by OSU's Institute for Materials Research, the Global Arts and Humanities Discovery Theme, and IKEA. I'd also like to thank the students who worked with Outpost Office on the exhibition, Caroline Kirka, Eleanor Lewis, Faith Martin, and Kara Lennon. They were really wonderful to work with this semester. So in broadest terms, Fulfilled considers the role of architecture in a culture shaped by the excessive manufacture and assuagement of desire. Fulfillment is a social, typological, formal, aesthetic, and economic practice constructed collectively through both digital and physical interactions. It is a cultural practice which evolves like a language, both universally transferable and contextually specific. This symposium aims to draw out these arrangements, sticky relationships, and material byproducts of cultural production, and to ask again the age-old question, what does it mean to be fulfilled? From political mapping and questions of labor to digital and physical storage typologies, contemporary architects are learning from and critically working within an architecture of fulfillment. Their interests and approaches span from the material and environmental shortcomings of global logistics to the formal, representational, and cultural potentials of a culture of excess. Fulfillment networks are not invisible systems, they're tangible objects. Warehouses, suburban houses, parking lots, cardboard boxes, shopping malls, mechanical systems, shipping containers. However, the identifiable typologies I just listed are not the content of an architecture of fulfillment. In contemporary terms, they're the symptom, not the disease. Fulfilled is interested in new forms of architectural practice and research, which are possible, typical, and even surreptitiously encouraged in the age of fulfillment. The symposium will highlight architecture's unique capacity to offer methodologies for confronting an increasingly ambiguous, alienating world and produce new knowledge and unexpected solutions that go beyond the dichotomies of rural and urban territories. Today we'll examine these themes through three main issues of fulfillment: logistical, material, and cultural. Logistical fulfillment will present designs informed by global networks and distribution environments. From their initial inclination to the final object procurement, we'll explore the myriad of physical and digital environments which sustain a culture of fulfillment. Dramatic changes occurring in the production and procurement of global goods are shaping the type of architecture and spaces created. From the living room laptop, where items are browsed, reviewed, and purchased, to warehouse storage, where objects are stored, stocked, and categorized, architectural environments comprise both the front and back end of fulfillment. Material fulfillment will explore the use of materials as global capital, finite resources, and aesthetic artifacts. As we'll see in the presentation, designers today are interested in distinguishing cultural attitudes toward the use of materials as much as they might consider the physical properties of the individual materials themselves. This group of designers works to elicit the latent potentials found in the materials of fulfillment networks. While many of these materials are mass-produced and standardized across political contexts, their use and inevitable reuse is culturally specific. And finally, beyond material and logistical aspects of fulfillment, there's a more difficult and potentially more rewarding aspect of fulfillment: the satisfaction of desire. Cultural fulfillment will examine the architecture of desire through the proliferation of designed objects from spoons to cities. Until the term became synonymous with Amazon warehouses, the most common definition of fulfillment was related to the achievement of something desired, promised, or predicted. In other words, an action and a result. We could easily say that all architecture is the result of desire, a desire for space, shelter, meaning, or beauty. Fulfillment in this way brings together the tangible and intangible aspects of material production, the ineffable satisfaction of personal desire, and proposes that design is a necessary intangible in an increasingly tangible world. In a supply chain system where each box contains a scan code and each meter of the delivery path has been mapped for efficiency, there's something increasingly inefficient, yet absolutely necessary about desire, its creation, and its effect on the world. As we approach the 20-year anniversary of the publication of the Harvard Design School Guide to Shopping, there's surprisingly little theorization on how the enormous advancements in the logistics of material movement and its cultural impacts in the past 2 decades have shaped architecture. As our symposium respondent, Anna Miljacki, has written, quote, "The question of how to critically describe or theorize the relationship between consumption and architecture at the end of postmodernism remains open." To consider this topic through the lens of another discipline, the anthropologist Anna Lowenhaupt-Singh writes in her book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, quote, "Everyone knows a commodity. It is the material good of capitalist production and the object of consumers' desire. Commodities seem so familiar that we imagine them ready-made for us through every stage of production and distribution as they pass from hand to hand until they arrive at the customer. Yet the closer we look at the commodity chain, the more every step, even transportation, can be seen as an arena of cultural production. Global capitalism is made in the friction of these chains as divergent cultural economies are linked, often awkwardly. Yet the commodity itself must emerge as if untouched by this friction." End quote. As designers, we recognize in her description that friction is the space of design. The Fulfilled exhibition in the Banvard Gallery, which you saw last night, was an opportunity to explore the visibility of that friction in the design project. I consider the exhibition as a large collaborative design project between a curator, 40 architectural practices, their numerous employees and designers, Outpost Office, a graphic designer, a group of student actors, the USPS Postal Service, OSU's email service, the servers at Instagram, YouTube, Lowe's, and IKEA. I believe that this shared interest in authorship will be a common theme throughout the day and represents a mode of practice which is common in the age of fulfillment. For the duration of the exhibition, the Banvard Gallery is being used as a storage space where the first month is free. The variety of responses to the strict prompt of the USPS flat rate box reveal the creative potentials of design thinking and have left me inspired by the creativity of the participants. The responses included such contents as a bag of water from Lake Michigan, models of houses, models of sand, boxes inside boxes with tiny drawings of boxes inside, a single box of other tiny boxes, a box of rotting fruit, material samples, an invoice billing me for the designer's time and labor, and others who took the prompt quite literally and filled the box with things that they needed space to store. Working within the constraints of economics, logistics, and communication networks, the aim of the exhibition was to produce difference only through the friction naturally occurring between these individual systems, each with its own built-in biases, efficiencies, and of course, inefficiencies. The designer's ability to deftly work between aesthetic issues of color, geometry, and form, and combine those with larger systematic thinking between the relationship of the contents and the unconventional format of the exhibition was really the most rewarding part of the curation. As I prepare now to give the stage over to our presenters, I'd like to thank each one of you for joining us in Columbus today in what I hope will be an enriching experience for you as it has been for me to organize this event. I'd like to start now by introducing our first moderator, Jennifer Clark. Jennifer Clark is professor and head of the City and Regional Planning section at the Knowlton School. In her own research, she specializes in urban and regional economic development planning. Dr. Clark's most recent book, Uneven Innovation, The Work of Smart Cities, is forthcoming with Columbia University Press. Her other books, including Working Regions, Reconnecting Innovation and Production in a Knowledge Economy, and Remaking Regional Economies, Power, Labor, and Firm Strategies in the Knowledge Economy, with Susan Christofferson. She's also co-editor of the Handbook of Manufacturing Industries in the World Economy and Transitions in Regional Economic Development. She earned her PhD from Cornell University, a master's degree from Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota, and a BA from Wesleyan University in Connecticut. Dr. Clark teaches courses on urban and regional economic development theory, analysis and practice, and research design and methods. She has provided expert testimony before U.S. Congress and policy advice and consulting to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the Canadian, UK, and US governments, as well as serving on non-governmental policy commissions and committees. Before joining the Knowlton School recently, Dr. Clark taught at Cornell University and at the Georgia Institute for Technology, where she was director of the Center of Urban Innovation. Please help me welcome Jennifer Clark.
Thank you very much, Ashley, and thank you for the opportunity to start off as moderator. I so appreciate that you recognize the connections between architecture and planning so clearly. And also, I should say, in my leadership role here at Knowlton, I so appreciate as well how you have actually brought your vision. It is a huge deal to put on a symposium like this. So you were so kind to do the thank yous at the beginning, and I would like to thank you as well. That's where the energy and the importance really comes from our faculty. So I would like to invite, we have 3 panelists with us today for the logistical fulfillment panel. What I'm going to do is go ahead and introduce them before their remarks, each individually. But right now, I just want to let you know who everybody is as I invite them forward. Jesse LeCavalier, who's coming to us. Please join us up here. Leda Aguirre and Curtis Roth, who comes from our own faculty. I did want to say a little bit of words about the introduction to this panel on logistical fulfillment. As Ashley mentioned, my work is really on economic development within planning, but economic geography is what we would sort of call it from the academic side of it. And what that really is the spatial distribution of economic activity. So when we look at questions about how the built environment is produced by socio-technical systems, many of them economic, not all, and also how those systems actually produce and reproduce distributional outcomes. So logistics is really, really central to that. And so I think it's a really important way for us to start thinking about how we're not just looking at cities as platforms for innovation and consumption, but also how distribution fits into that as well. So with that, I would ask Jesse to join me up here for his presentation.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Ashley. I echo the kudos. It's an unbelievable logistical enterprise to have pulled off what you have been pulling off, and so it's amazing to witness that. It's been amazing to witness this. I think I got an email in like August or something about this symposium, which is amazing to be so on top of it, and I think that's partly why it had come together so seamlessly. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to be amongst such great friends and colleagues, and thank you also to the Knowlton School and to OSU for the hospitality. So I want to, today for me, I'm going to try to talk about 3 design projects as quickly as I can. And let's see where my screen is. Sorry about this. I'm on 2 screens at once here. What's happening? There we go. Try that one more time. So some of my research, as Jennifer mentioned, is about the questions of logistics and fulfillment, and I wanted to start by just actually making a brief plug for some work that I've been doing with students from the Yale School of Architecture about these questions, and it's about to go live on a website called Landscapes of Fulfillment, which includes research that's done with the participants from these seminars, and it's sort of an online archive of a series of projects that look at territories and circuits and interfaces and frontiers of logistics. So just as a kind of in case you're interested in learning more, here's a place for that. And it's with the support of the School of Architecture and designed by Paige Camo, for both of which I'm very grateful for. But maybe for a second, we might ask, like, what is logistics? As Jennifer mentioned, of course, it has to do with distribution. It has to do with the process of moving things around in time and space. It's related to the questions of supply chain management. We might ask, wait a second, what is the supply chain? Where does that come from? This is one of the first times it's used. It was this is 1982, a management consulting report that describes the supply chain as the sequence of events that occurs from after the procurement of raw material through to delivery to the final customer. We know maybe now, looking at that, this is somewhat of a quaint definition, because it seems so contained. We know that when something like IKEA manages and owns its own forests and keeps track of its trees, that's a notion of the supply chain that goes far upstream to the very sort of origins of living things. And for all of us who use any kind of smart device that sends signals back to a company to monitor our own behavior, we know that the supply chain continues all the way into our own user experience and daily life. But increasingly, even if this is embedded in all aspects of our daily life, it also increasingly, I think, remains remote from our daily experience. So as Jennifer mentioned, I describe some of these things in my book, The Rule of Logistics, which I will not go into too much detail today, except I wanted to highlight a few of the architectural dimensions of this, which have to do with the buildings of Walmart, or the network of collections of infrastructural elements that the company uses to manage its vast inventory of objects in motion. And this is a typical distribution center, which is a tangle of conveyors and rollers and shelving systems, and all of that is connected through this interface, which is the envelope of the building, which allows then objects to be loaded into trailers, which then are toggled back and forth between the loading docks of these things. These are the supercenters, which are the retail spaces, and these you might see as buildings that have a conventional envelope defined in the lower register of the screen here as a wall. But I would say the actual edge of the building really is effectively this zone, which is the point of sale and the place where the barcode is finally scanned for the last time as it's released into the hands of the customer. And all of that information which is a massive amount of information. One estimate is that Walmart generates 2.4% of the world's data. That's all stored in proprietary data centers, which are designed, in this case, from Walmart's data center outside of Bentonville to be buried and hidden from sight. And so all three of these things form a network of infrastructural architecture that are linked to different forms of storage, whether it's the storage and movement of the distribution center, or the storage of goods, or the storage of data. Storage, of course, historically imagined as a kind of fixed element of a distribution system. And in this case, these are storage racks that are literally the structure of the building, so the storage and architecture become synonymous. But some of this is changing. Amazon's investment in the Kiva system, which is now their Amazon robotics system, is establishing a new paradigm, I think, not just for storage, but for architecture. Rather than conforming to Enlightenment models of order, in which the same thing goes back to the same place all the time, the way that a library might work, where you have a system of designation of things in space through a kind of regime of knowledge structure, this is a much different system where the objects that are being moved around go back to the first available place. And so what's happening is the warehouse is constantly reconfiguring itself. And so with that, that very quick tour in the background, I'd love to talk about three projects. One is for the Seoul Biennial. This was a contribution to a section about movement, and the project was a series of installations that had to do with different scales. So the body, the building, and the city, and each scale used one aspect of logistics and infrastructure to house the objects on display. So at the body scale, we collected augmentations from the logistical environment and put those on display vis-a-vis consumer objects, with the suggestion that we might be more logistical than we're willing to admit. And we adopted and appropriated the rack as a way to do that, and then developed a series of drawings about this confrontation. At the building scale, we looked at this collection of these building types that I just showed you, and tried to think about how these might relate to each other, and developed a display device that would reshuffle them to highlight their compatibility, but also to investigate the configurations that might emerge through that recombination. So through a series of belts and rollers, which would then at sort of random intervals move back and forth at different times, we called it this cadaver schizomatic, where you would end up with this sort of new sets of elements that would be occasionally mostly noise, but occasionally would snap together, and a new hybrid suggestion might emerge. And so based on that, then we developed a series of of drawings that looked at what these combinations might be like. And in some cases, these aren't intuitive, but there's an inherent compatibility within logistical systems that actually bred, I think, somewhat plausible new building types that combine storage and shopping and living together. But this work led to another project, which was my contribution to the 2018 Moma PS1 Young Architects program, and it was linked to research into the space of supply chain equipment and materials handling systems in this case in Secaucus, New Jersey. And behind the kind of blank warehouses of the Meadowlands are these amazing interiors where like a single racking system gets repeated over, let's say, 500,000 square feet and produces what, to my mind, are really dazzling and kind of kaleidoscopic effects like the one you see here. And in talking with the suppliers, the people who work with this, what we discovered is that there's an incredible abundance and surplus of this raw material that makes the tightly wound, just-in-time fulfillment processes possible. So, in other words, in order for these kind of logistical systems that we imagine to be working so quickly and with such little margin, so sort of, in the language of fulfillment, lean distribution, they are incredibly flabby. There's an incredible amount of slack and surplus and looseness in the material world that makes that possible, because something has to give in these processes, and one of the things that gives is the spatial surplus of all of these kinds of environments and equipment. So basically we discovered that there's all this available raw material, and this became the basis for our proposal for the courtyard, which was to take the humble pallet rack and to investigate what would happen if one had basically a limitless amount of them, which is more or less what we had. When we went into a meeting to make the pitch to this company to lend us these racks, initially I was kind of like, well, maybe could we have like 80? And they were like, yeah, you can have 80,000. How many do you need? And so they were sort of disappointed that we didn't want more than what we could ask for, but we only had the 15,000 square feet of the courtyard. So the proposal was basically to take the rack and multiply it, develop it into a series of arrays, and then to selectively remove pieces to create clearings, which then produced this system. So we describe it as a series of racks, stacks, and tracks. And the stacks are a series of custom furniture that inhabits the space of the rack, and the tracks are overhead conveyance systems that offered a combination of wayfinding and lighting and atmosphere, cooling, and things like that. And I think what the team and I became excited about was the way that through the repetition of a simple serial, the repetition of a simple object, you would then create a series of effects and atmospheres simply through sort of reconfiguration or through the sort of transparency of the thing. And so this then developed into a series of different kind of pockets of atmosphere, so these kind of misty enclaves, or these glowing moments at nighttime, or then in the day, places to seek out shade or refuge. And so we were imagining this as something that you would find your way into and discover. We were not selected, but because this project was imagined as a kind of prototype, there's a flexibility to it. It's almost like we could sort of pour it into the courtyard, but it could go into different configurations. So I'm still in the process of looking for places where we might take advantage of this abundance of these robust inhabitable structures. And then the last project that I want to share today is one that's in progress. This is the first time I've actually presented it publicly, so I'm happy to be able to do that. But it's very much in progress. And it's a project that started with a grant from the New York State Council for the Arts to look at the infrastructure of the New Jersey Meadowlands, which is the marshy area across the river from Manhattan. And the idea was that there are kind of latent public possibilities in these infrastructural systems that might be able to be brought forth, and that one could, through a way of looking, catalyze latent or support active publics that are already there, but maybe could benefit from greater physical support through actual spaces or through actual visibility and navigability. So the project began by looking at the territory. This is oriented north, is on the right side of the screen. So the Manhattan would be on the lower portion of the screen. The territory is riven. If any of you have ever tried to drive through the Meadowlands, God help you. It's an incredibly frustrating place to navigate, but partly what makes it so fascinating. And you can see through some of these. My pointer, I'm afraid, is low on batteries, but you can see that a series of pathways that are then broken up by the river, by the Hackensack River. But these are conduits, these are train tracks, these are roadways, and then the landscape supports a range of infrastructural systems like radio towers. It's one of the densest places for radio transmission in the region, partly because of the territory, partly because of the openness, but also, as I understand it, brackish water helps signals to propagate. It's the site of a significant amount of energy storage and energy production, including a number of power plants and waste-to-energy facilities. The transcontinental pipeline terminates here so this is all the natural gas from Texas lands here, and then, of course, famously, landfills. This is where much of New York's waste was deposited, and other things, if you watch movies or The Sopranos. This is, not only one of these is active, but they remain a challenging type. So the project then examines the histories of these through the lens of a kind of urban metabolism, to understand this landscape as fundamentally a landscape of fulfillment, in the sense that it's processing all of these flows. It's taking inputs, it's producing outputs, it's processing exchanges, and then it also there's other overlays of fulfillment, including a massive distribution footprint, as well as a significant data center presence here. So all of these layers produce this urban, or this sort of semi-urban condition that I think is in search of an architectural language. Like, I think it's something that people have obviously invested a lot of energy into, but something that I think remains a challenge from, let's say, this logistical point of view, to say how could the architecture of logistics or the infrastructure of logistics suggest an appropriate design response. And so one of the ideas here is, by looking more closely at the industrial installations of this area, including these tanks and landfills and towers and data centers and distribution centers, that one might discover and arrive at a series of responses. And so I want to talk to you about a few of those that I've been developing. I want just to point out a couple other things about the site of the Meadowlands. It's one of the most polluted landscapes in the country. This is one example of this. So CERCLA is linked to the Superfund policy. So it's covered with Superfund sites. It's also an active ecological system. So the Meadowlands is an amazingly rich and abundant ecosystem, but it's characterized by these kinds of collisions. So Phragmites australis in the upper right, this massive reed network that then is colliding with the retaining wall and lawn. This is, I think, behind the Chili's on Route 7. But you get a sense of that sort of friction. And it's also, of course, with Sandy, the Meadowlands flooded dramatically, which is partly what wetlands do, but healthy wetlands will absorb and mitigate high water. But right now you see this is the response. The post-Sandy response is to basically build on the right, to build a bank of berms around sensitive material. There's another layer of fulfillment beyond distribution, beyond data, beyond waste and energy production. There's this level of fulfillment, which is the fulfillment of experience and desire and shopping. The American dream is about to be finished, or it's actually recently opened. So so you can read that in different ways. The American dream has now been completed in the New Jersey Meadowlands, which includes, among other things, an indoor ski slope, the largest aquarium. This is run by the same people who run the West Edmonton Mall and the Mall of America. They estimate that 40 million people will visit this mall every year, which is a little optimistic, I think, but it would amount to a Super Bowl's worth of people every day coming to this part of the region, which is incredibly difficult to do, and would involve taking lots of buses from the Port Authority across, which 50 years ago, famously, Robert Smithson did just that, took the bus from the Port Authority through this landscape to discover what he described as these latent monuments of Passaic, what he described as ruins in reverse, and described this area as being, quote, full of holes, which are in a sense vacancies that define, without trying, the memory traces of an abandoned set of futures. Nancy Holt, collaborator and partner, also developed this amazing proposal for one of the landfills. This is one of the first so-called landfill art projects. This was to develop this observatory basically on top of one of the landfills, which is one of the ones that we have been observing. And so the project, basically, the first part of the project is a series of catalogs of these sites, so landfills, radio towers, tanks on the right, that's the Transco tank, and then these are developed into a series of posters that catalog all of these elements and explain what they all are. The history of landfills is fascinating, as is radio transmission. Some of the one of the first predominantly African-American stations was transmitting from here. So there's an incredibly rich cultural history as well as material history. But it's an incredibly difficult landscape to navigate. And so the proposal is to, in a way, be inspired by these kinds of infrastructural installations. This is in the fens of England, borrowed from Vittorio De Palma's book, to develop a series of small installations that would act as a network of minor infrastructures that would share a language and provide some kind of legibility across distance, whose forms might form a family, and who might be familiar upon chance encounter. So through a further investigation of these more eccentric infrastructural elements, like the switch houses of the drawbridges or the transmitting buildings or the warehouse sheds, then we developed a series of prototypes, borrowing, in a way, the practice of Walmart's own approach to that, to then develop a series of base forms that then get combined into a series of specific installations. And that's what's on display in the gallery. There are 16 sites. Each one operates in a certain way to help hopefully catalyze some latent form of publicness, often through making connections to a larger network that are currently not available. And so the three that I want to talk about quickly, these platforms, this kind of boathouse, and then this new institution. So a series of platforms that basically build over unbuildable contaminated soil to provide both relationships internally and externally out to the landscape, and then back to the kind of strip mall landscape, and then to create a kind of pocket of gathering in this space. This one, the drawbridge here, if that were connected, one could navigate the entire region, but it's the one missing link, and so this would form that link while allowing boat traffic to navigate underneath it and provide a series of public amenities. And then finally, a project that looks at using the shed typology of storage to produce a kind of claustral condition that might allow for a new institution that would support investigations into the fauna and flora of this landscape. So all together, and I will conclude here, these projects for me have been an effort to translate this research into logistics into a design language that I'm currently in the process of developing, and look forward to having a chance to discuss it further. So thank you for joining us on the very beginning of the day. I'll leave it there. Thanks.